second factor is that small firms have become much more dominant in innovation. You can see that red line, those are firms with less than 5,000 jobs, not necessarily small, but small and mid-sized. And you can see that almost all the R&D growth in the United States has come from those size firms. And other piece of this is obviously, as you all know, universities have become a much bigger share of the innovation system. License patents have quadrupled, license income quadrupled, and new startups have more than doubled in the last decade as universities take on a bigger role and as they build infrastructures like research parks to be able to do this. Lastly, innovation has become much more globally collaborative. The number of research articles that involve foreign collaboration, the number of companies that involve foreign collaborators has grown significantly. So when you think about putting all that together, what does it mean for the countries that would lead in innovation? We released this report in March, where we benchmarked innovation performance among 40 nations. And there we go. So the countries include all the EU countries, North America, and then Australia, Brazil, China, India, Japan, South Korea, Russia, and Singapore. And so what we wanted to look at was really how well are these nations performing. So we looked at a set of human capital indicators, innovation capacity, entrepreneurship, IT infrastructure, economic policy, and then economic performance. And what we found was that the U.S., contrary to what a lot of people in the U.S. believe and what a lot of the media portrays the U.S. as, the U.S. is not number one. We're actually sixth. If you put all of these 16 indicators together, add up their scores, you can see that Singapore is number one, Sweden, Luxembourg, Denmark, and Korea. Actually, Korea being ahead of the U.S. now, even though their income, per capita income, about maybe 60% of the U.S. And you can see on the far end, you can see countries like India, Brazil, even China somewhat on the far end of that, countries that you might think may be a little higher given what we read about them. Now, on the other hand, if you look at change, if you look at where these countries were back around 2000, 2002, and then where they've come from, add all those change scores together and combine them into one metric, what you can see is that the U.S. is behind these countries. So China being the country that has made the most progress of any of the 40 nations or regions we looked at. Singapore second most, that's the reason why Singapore is number one right now. But you can see the U.S. is actually dead last. So we have made less progress than any other nation or region that we examined. We simply, in the U.S., have been resting on our laurels. We have this view that we're number one and we're always going to be number one. And if you say, why are these countries ahead of us? Well, certainly part of it is catch up. Some of these countries are farther behind, so it's easier to catch up, but that's not the whole story. Part of it, a large part of it, I would argue, is active innovation policies. These countries take this somewhat more seriously than we do. They put real resources behind it. So that's the overall change thing. There you can see some of these countries that maybe were a little lower now are higher. Russia, very high on change, partly because they started from a low level. But Japan, here a country that people think, well, what have they done? They're a basket case. In fact, Japan is making much faster progress than we are. If you look at a few of these other indicators, a little hard to see. These are researchers, so how many scientific researchers a share of the economy. U.S. doesn't do that badly, Sweden being number one. You can look and see that China, India, Brazil, Mexico numbers quite low. Now, if you look at change, though, you can see China's number one, doubled their number of researchers in less than a decade. Mexico, our U.S. competitor right to the south, obviously, but Korea, Singapore, a country like Brazil, you wouldn't think of, again, very significant progress on these metrics. Corporate R&D, again, U.S. does okay. We're fifth overall. You can see that Japan being number one in corporate R&D. But now if you look at corporate R&D change, what you see is China being number one by a long shot, Mexico, both of that driven by multinational R&D investments. Some countries, though, actually not doing quite well. You can see the U.S. is actually negative. So for the first time in American history, corporate R&D as a share of GDP has gone down on a sustained basis. Part of that is is offshoring of R&D. Part of it is the fact that we have a very inept, weak R&D tax incentive system, but other factors as well. Venture capital, you know, if you ask Americans, or probably ask anybody in this room, who's got the best venture capital system in the world? 90% of the people would say the U.S. Well, that's wrong. Actually, Sweden has the best venture capital system in the world, or at least the most of it. But other countries like the UK, Singapore, and South Korea, U.S. is actually fifth on venture capital. Interesting, you can see countries that are doing well on technology, like China and Japan, very little venture capital. Most of their growth is really about big corporations doing innovation. This one a little hard to read. New firm change. These are the percentage growth in new firms. You can see countries like Singapore, India, Sweden, different countries there. U.S., not too bad. Government R&D against countries like Sweden, Singapore, France ahead of us. But now if you look at change in government R&D as a share of GDP, you see a country like Ireland, where Ireland has made a national commitment to move beyond simply a branch plant launching pad for going into the EU, but to really become a true innovation economy. And so they've made a significant commitment to government R&D. Spain, I understand, is doing something similar. Spain, by the way, at least until Australia just passed its new R&D tax credit 2 weeks ago, Spain, I believe, had one of the highest R&D tax credits in the world. And you can see countries like South Korea, Russia there. So let me just give you a couple on states. We do this report, which is on our website, called the State New Economy Index, where we look at 29 different indicators to look at how are these factors playing out in states. So we look at things like knowledge jobs and technology and globalization. And you can see these are the overall scores. This is, in some ways, if you're not from the U.S., maybe the perception is the U.S. is one big sort of unified system. In fact, we are a very diverse country in terms of innovation capabilities. The strongest parts of our innovation economy are from Virginia, which you can see right above North Carolina, up through Massachusetts, and then also on the West Coast, Washington, Oregon, California, and to some extent the mountain states of Colorado and Utah. States that don't do very well, the Deep South, Alabama, Mississippi, these are states that historically have tried to succeed by having low costs, branch plant economy, low skill workers, and low cost. That's a totally failed bankrupt strategy. It worked for a long time after World War II, but it's a failed strategy now, and these states are struggling now to catch up. A couple of other ones there, high-tech jobs. These are who's got the most high-tech jobs in the U.S. As a share of workforce. You might be surprised to see New Mexico there, but New Mexico has a lot of high-tech jobs, partly because of some spillovers, spin-offs from the federal laboratories there. Industry investment in R&D. I think when we do this next year, Michigan won't be number one, but they're number one now in terms of the most corporate R&D in the U.S. I should have, by the way, said it, the dark green. The green is the high, and the brown is the low, and the blue is in the middle there.